Beverley Côté had $43 and a broken dryer on the morning her daughter left for university. Not $43 after groceries. Not $43 after the gas to drive 3 hours north to Sudbury. $43 before any of it. That was the move-in, the first week of meals, and the toll on Highway 69, all living inside the same number. Her daughter was 23 years old. She had gotten into Laurentian University at 32. Not at 18 like the others, not the first time she applied, not the easy way. The acceptance letter had arrived on a Tuesday in March. And Angie had stood in the kitchen of the house on Elm Grove Road in Timmins, holding it with both hands. The way you hold something you have waited for. Long enough that you are not sure anymore if you are allowed to want it. Beverley had read it over her daughter's shoulder. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Well." And that one word carried everything. The pride and the fear and the math she was already doing in her head. The same math she had been doing for 23 years, the kind that never quite balanced. 3 weeks before that morning, Beverley Côté had been working the lunch counter at Carla's Diner on 3rd Avenue. She had worked there for 11 years. She knew which stools wobbled, which coffee urn ran hot, and which regulars needed their cup topped before they asked. She knew the walk-in cooler stuck on humid days, and that the exhaust fan above the grill made a sound like a loose screw after 10 in the morning, which it was, which nobody had fixed, which nobody would fix because the owner, Ray Carlan, believed that things that still worked did not need attention. Beverley was 51. She had been in Timmins since she was 26, when she followed a man named Patrick Duclos up from Sudbury, because he said he had a job lined up at the mine and a plan for what came after. The job materialized. The plan did not. By the time Angie was born, Patrick had moved on to a plan that did not include either of them, and Beverley had moved into the house on Elm Grove with a 6-month-old and a security deposit she borrowed from her mother. Her mother, Ruth Côté, had died 4 years ago. She had lived 40 minutes away in Kapuskassis, and she had called every Sunday morning at 9. And she had never once told Beverley she was proud of her without making it feel like it came from a place of genuine surprise. That was Ruth. She meant well. She just delivered everything sideways. Beverley had raised Angie on the counter money, tips included, on slow Januaries and the back half of February and the dead weeks after Christmas when the regulars stayed home and the tourists did not come because there were no tourists, not in Timmins, not in January. She had raised her on almost nothing and made it look like something. Angie had figured it out early, not because anyone told her, but because she had her mother's eyes, which were the kind that noticed the math before anyone said the numbers out loud. She knew that they did not go on school trips when the form came home in September. She knew that groceries happened on Tuesday because that was payday, and that the fridge on Thursday had a different quality of empty than the fridge on Monday. She did not say any of this. She just learned to want smaller things, which is not something any child should have to teach herself, but which some children do, quietly, without being asked. The acceptance letter changed the number of things that needed to happen. Beverley sat at the kitchen table that same Tuesday night with a spiral notebook and a pen that was almost out of ink. She wrote down what she knew. Tuition, covered by the student loan. Rent at Laurentian's residence, $900 a month. Books, supplies, the cost of getting Angie and her boxes up the highway and into a room. The cost of getting herself back. She added and subtracted and added again, which was a habit from years of making a set of numbers do something they were not designed to do. By the end of the page, the pen had run out entirely. She found another one in the drawer, the one from the dentist's office with a logo on the side, and kept going. There was no good number at the end. There was a number that was possible if nothing unexpected happened between now and August. Nothing unexpected always happened. That was not pessimism. That was 11 years behind a lunch counter in a mining town in northern Ontario. Her co-worker Brenda Marsh had noticed, the way Brenda noticed most things, which was loudly and with affection and without much filter. Brenda was 47, had 3 adult kids of her own, and had the specific energy of a woman who had been through enough that she had stopped being delicate about the truth. She said, "You look like you're doing arithmetic that isn't working out." Beverley said, "My daughter got into rewritten." Brenda stopped wiping down the counter. She said, "Angie?" Beverley said, "She's 32. She applied last fall and didn't tell me until the letter came." Brenda was quiet for 1 second. Then she said, "Good Lord, that girl." And then she said, "Are you okay?" Beverley said, "I'm fine." Brenda said, "That's not what I asked." They were not the same question. Beverley knew that. She let it sit. She went back to the coffee urn. Brenda let her because that was how they worked, and because sometimes the most useful thing one woman can do for another is leave a space open without demanding it be filled. The jacket Angie had been wearing since her second year of high school was a navy blue parka from the Army and Navy on Algonquin Boulevard. Beverley had bought it in October of that year for $38 from the clearance rack, 2 sizes too large because she knew the next one had to last. The hood's elastic had gone slack by year 3. One of the zipper pulls had broken off by year 4 and been replaced by a safety pin that Angie had bent into a loop herself. The left pocket had a hole in the lining that went through to the down, so she kept nothing in that pocket. The right pocket still worked. She kept her bus pass there. Beverley had seen the jacket every winter for 6 years. She saw it hanging by the door every morning when she left before 6 to open the diner. She saw it there when she came home at 3. She had looked at it enough times to know every frayed thread at the hem, every place where the stitching had pulled loose at the shoulder, every small evidence of time and use, and a girl who had learned not to ask for things. She had tried twice to replace it. Both times, Angie had said the same thing. "Mom, it's fine. It still does the job." The second time she said it, she was 18, and her voice had the particular steadiness of someone who had decided on her own terms what counted as enough. Beverley had not pushed. She recognized the voice. It was her own voice, 10 years earlier, saying the same thing to her own mother about the car that burned oil and the boots that let in water. Angie had worn that jacket to every winter of her adult life. She wore it to work at the grocery store. She wore it to her college prep classes at Northern College, the ones she took on Saturday mornings for 2 years before she applied to rewritten. She wore it on the bus and to the library and to every appointment where you sit across from someone and hope they see past the outside to what you're actually offering. In November of the year before the acceptance letter, a woman at the library had offered Angie a coat, not formally. She had pulled her aside after a program night and said, "My daughter left some things. There's a good wool coat that would suit you." Angie had looked at the woman. She had said, "That's kind of you, but I'm all right." Her voice was quiet and undefensive. The woman had nodded and let it go. Angie had not told Beverley this happened. Beverley found out a year later from someone else entirely. When she heard, she did not say anything about it. She thought about it for a long time, alone, in the way you think about something when you recognize in your child a decision that is both correct and costly, and you are not sure whether to be proud or heartbroken, and you suspect the answer might be both. The summer before rewritten was the summer the diner cut hours. Ray Carlin said it was seasonal. He said it every summer, and every summer it was true in the sense that the hours came back in September, which did not help June or July. Beverley went from 5 shifts a week to 3. She picked up 2 evenings at a banquet hall on the edge of town, setting tables and bussing after weddings and retirement parties. $40 a night cash, which was not good money, but was the specific kind of money that does not ask questions. She saved what she could. She tracked it in the same spiral notebook. The numbers moved in the right direction, slowly, the way things moved when you were doing everything alone, and the margin was narrow enough that one unexpected thing could erase a month of careful. The unexpected thing was the car. The radiator. A Tuesday in July, on the way back from Brenda's after a shift, the temperature gauge climbed, and the engine made a sound like a question it couldn't finish. The mechanic on Spruce Street said the repair was $340. or the car didn't drive north in August, which the car needed to do. She paid it. She had no other option. She paid it from the savings, and then she looked at the notebook, and then she did the math again, and the number at the bottom of the page was not the number she needed it to be. It was smaller. It was the kind of smaller that meant the move to Sudbury would happen. But the first 2 weeks of Angie's life there would happen on credit. She would have to pay back at a rate that made her chest feel tight when she thought about it, past 9 at night. She did not tell Angie about the radiator. She said it was taken care of, and she meant it in the literal sense. She had taken care of it. That was what she did. She had taken care of things, quietly and without ceremony, for 23 years. And she was not going to stop now because the math had gotten harder. The math had always been hard. That was not new. What was new was that she could see August from here, and August looked like something. The night before they left, Beverley packed the car herself. Angie was at her shift at the grocery store until 10. Beverley loaded boxes by herself in the driveway. The evening warmed the way Northern Ontario evenings are warm in August. Briefly, and with effort, the sky holding light longer than seemed right. She carried out the lamp from Angie's room, the box of books, the 2 kitchen boxes, the ones with the dishes from the thrift store on Pine Street that she'd washed 3 times to make sure they were clean. The box with the extra blanket and the winter emergency kit she'd assembled herself, granola bars and a flashlight and a foil emergency blanket, because Angie was going to be 250 kilometers away, and Beverley had read enough about Northern Ontario winters to know that the highway was not always forgiving. She lifted the heaviest box last, the one with the textbooks Angie had already bought secondhand from a student in the program ahead of her. Beverley had looked up the prices on the university website. She had not said anything about them. The student ahead had sold them for $30 total. Beverley had slipped an extra $20 into the envelope when she handed it to Angie, without explanation, and Angie had looked at her for a moment before folding the envelope and putting it in her pocket. She stood in the driveway after the last box and looked at the car. Full, ready, the kind of ready that had taken 11 years of lunch counter shifts to produce. She stood there for a while. It was past 9. The driveway light was on. The street was quiet. She went back inside. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened the notebook. She looked at the number at the bottom of the last page, $43 after the radiator, after the boxes, after the second-hand dishes and the emergency kit and the gas money she had folded into a card that was sitting on the passenger seat of the car. $43, and a broken dryer that she had been line drying around since May. She sat there for a moment. She thought about her mother. She thought about what Ruth would have said, which probably would have been something practical and slightly off-register. The way Ruth always was, the way you sometimes miss a person not for the things they did right, but for the specific shape of the ways they got things wrong. She closed the notebook. She went to bed. The drive up the highway took 3.5 hours. Angie sat in the passenger seat in the navy jacket because the car's air conditioning had never worked and the morning was still cool. They listened to the radio until the signal changed and then drove in quiet. The kind of quiet that is not empty, that happens between 2 people who have been in enough hard mornings together, that silence does not require filling. At one point, outside of Mark's Day, Angie said, "Mom." Beverley said, "Yeah." Angie said, "You didn't have to pack the car yourself." Beverley said, "You had work." Angie said, "I know, but still." That was the end of that conversation. It did not need more. Both of them understood what was underneath it, and neither of them needed to say it, because they had been reading each other's silences for 23 years. And they were fluent in the language by now. The residence room was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like fresh paint and industrial cleaner. And the particular optimism of things that are new. There were other families in the hallway, fathers carrying mini fridges, mothers with labeled bins from the container store, younger students who had not yet learned to hide the nervousness on their faces. Angie was older than almost everyone there. She walked into the room with the same steadiness she had been walking into things for a long time. They unloaded in 2 trips. They set up the room together. Beverley made the bed with the sheets from home, the blue flannel ones that had been Angie's since she was 16, and something about putting those particular sheets on a bed in a room in Sudbury felt like the longest sentence she had ever seen come to its period. When everything was in place, they stood in the room looking at it. It was a small room. It had a window that faced the parking lot. The desk was standard issue. The bed was narrow. It was the right room for what was beginning. Angie said, "It's good." Beverley said, "It is." Angie said, "Mom, I know you spent everything." Beverley started to say, "She hadn't." Angie said, "Don't." Beverley stopped. Angie said, "I know. I've always known." She said it without anger, without accusation. Just a fact, delivered the way facts are delivered by someone who has been holding them for a long time and has finally decided they can be said out loud. I know what you gave up. I know what you didn't get. I know what you put back on the shelf and said maybe later when you already knew it wasn't going to be later. Beverley looked at the window. Angie said, "I'm going to graduate, and I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to make it worth it." Beverley said, "It's already worth it." Angie said, "Mom." Beverley looked at her. Angie reached into the pocket of the navy jacket, the right one, the one that still worked. She pulled out an envelope. She held it out. It was not thick. It was a standard white envelope, sealed. On the front, in Angie's handwriting, it said, "For when you're on the highway home and you need something to read." Beverley took it. She looked at it. She said, "Now?" Angie said, "When you're on the highway." They hugged for longer than they normally did. Angie's face was pressed against her mother's shoulder, which was where it had fit when Angie was 6, and somehow still fit now. Beverley held her with both arms and did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying in that moment that was not already being said by the fact of the 2 of them standing there, in that room after all of it. She drove home alone. She pulled over at the rest stop outside Chelmsford, 40 minutes south of Sudbury. It was early afternoon. The highway was quiet. A transport rolled past. The sky was the particular shade of August blue that always made northern Ontario look like something on a postcard, even when it wasn't. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded in thirds. She unfolded it. Angie's handwriting, careful and even, the same handwriting that had been on school projects and grocery lists and birthday cards on the fridge for 23 years. She read it. Then she read it again. It was not long. It was 5 sentences. But the sentences had been chosen the way you choose words when you have been thinking about them for a long time. And you have finally figured out which ones are exactly right. You worked every morning I slept in. You made breakfast when your hands were shaking. You let me think we were okay when we weren't, and you let me be a kid when I didn't deserve to be one for free. I've been watching you my whole life. I know what it cost. Thank you for not letting me see you give up, even when you wanted to. Beverley sat with the letter in her hands. The transport had gone. The rest stop was quiet. A crow was sitting on the fence at the edge of the gravel, watching nothing in particular. She did not cry immediately. She sat for a moment with the words on the page in front of her, the way you sit when something true has found you. And you need a second to understand that you are allowed to receive it. Then she cried. Not the quiet kind, not the kind she had done alone in the kitchen on bad nights with her hands flat on the counter and her mouth closed. The other kind, the kind that has been accumulating for years and finally arrives all at once when someone says the thing you didn't know you needed to hear. She sat in the rest stop outside Chelmsford for 22 minutes. The crow left. A family pulled in beside her in a minivan, unloaded for a bathroom break, loaded back up, and drove away. She barely noticed them. When she was done, she folded the letter back along its creases. She put it in the breast pocket of her jacket, the inside pocket close. She pulled back onto the highway. She drove south. The sky stayed blue the whole way home. The house on Elm Grove Road was quiet when she got back. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Angie's room was down the hall, door open, stripped of most of what had made it hers. The lamp was gone. The bookshelf was mostly bare. The blue flannel sheets were in Sudbury. Beverley went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She stood at the window while it boiled, looking at the backyard, at the clothesline where she had been hanging laundry since May, because the dryer still did not work, and she had not replaced it yet and probably would not until something else stopped going wrong long enough to let her. The kettle clicked off. She made tea. She sat at the table. She took the letter out of her jacket pocket. She read it once more, slowly. Then she got up, opened the drawer under the counter, and found a magnet, the flat, square kind, white with a hardware store logo on it that had been in the drawer since before she could remember. She took the letter to the refrigerator. She folded it once to make it smaller, then changed her mind. She unfolded it. She wanted to see the handwriting. She pressed the magnet over the top edge. She stepped back. 5 sentences in Angie's handwriting on a white piece of paper on a second-hand refrigerator in a house on Elm Grove Road in Timmins, Ontario. She stood there looking at it for a while. Then she called Brenda. It was 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon. Brenda picked up on the second ring, which meant she was off shift and home, which meant the call had not woken her, which was a relief. Beverley said, "She's in." Brenda said, "I know, you told me." Beverley said, "No, I mean she wrote me a letter." Brenda was quiet. Beverley said, "She told me she'd been watching me her whole life." Brenda said, "Beverley." Beverley said, "She said she knows what it cost." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Brenda was the kind of woman who knew when not to speak, which was a harder skill than most people gave it credit for. Then Brenda said, "She knows because you showed her. That's the thing. You didn't hide it from her to protect her. You showed her what it looks like to keep going anyway." "That's not nothing, Bev. That is not nothing." Beverley looked at the letter on the refrigerator. She said, "I was scared she'd resent me for it." Brenda said, "Kids don't resent the real thing. They resent the pretending. You were always real." They talked for another 10 minutes about nothing in particular, the way you do after something large, when you need the small things to steady you. The diner schedule, whether Ray was going to fix the exhaust fan, whether Brenda's youngest was coming for Thanksgiving. Small and specific and exactly right. They hung up. The house was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow kind, the other kind. The letter stayed on the refrigerator. In October, a woman from the community center on Cedar Street called about a part-time position, coordinator, for their employment support program, 4 mornings a week. The job paid more per hour than the diner. It required someone who knew how to sit across from a person who was struggling and not make them feel small. The woman on the phone said someone had given Beverley's name. She did not say whose name. Beverley suspected Brenda and did not ask. She went in for the interview on a Wednesday. She wore the good blouse, the dark green one she had bought at the thrift store on Cedar the previous Christmas, and kept unworn in the closet, because she had not had a reason to wear it yet. She drove across town with the windows down because October in Timmins still had 2 or 3 days of that particular northern warmth before it closed for the season. She got the job. It was not a solution. It was an addition. She kept 3 shifts at the diner and took the 4 mornings at the center, which made the week full in a way that was tiring, and also, for the first time in a long time, purposeful in 2 directions at once. The broken dryer was replaced in November. Not new, secondhand, from a woman on Birchwood Avenue who was downsizing. $75, delivered by the woman's son-in-law in a pickup truck. It worked. Beverley plugged it in and ran it empty for 10 minutes just to hear it running. It was an unremarkable sound. She stood in the laundry room and listened to it anyway. In December, Angie came home for 3 weeks. She walked through the door with the navy jacket and a duffel bag, and the particular brightness of someone who has been doing something hard and discovering they are capable of it. She stood in the hallway and looked at the house, the way you look at the house you grew up in when you have been away long enough to see it clearly. She saw the letter on the refrigerator immediately. She stood in front of it. She touched the edge of the paper with one finger, lightly, the way her mother had traced the crooked letter on the birthday cake in a story Beverley had told her once. though she didn't know she'd borrowed the gesture. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You kept it." Beverley said, "Of course I kept it." Angie looked at her mother for a moment. She said, "I wrote it 4 times. The first 3 weren't right." Beverley said, "The 4th one was." They stood in the kitchen. The dryer was running in the other room, a steady mechanical hum that had replaced 6 months of quiet. Outside, the street was the usual Timmins December. Gray sky, salt on the pavement, the particular flatness of a northern Ontario winter settling in for the long stay. Inside there was tea, and a letter on the refrigerator, and a mother and daughter standing in the same kitchen they had always been in, which looked exactly the same as it always had, and was not anymore, quite the same at all. Beverley Côté did not get a different life. The house on Elm Grove Road was still the house on Elm Grove Road. The oven still ran unevenly. The bus was still late on Fridays. The lunch counter at Carla's still had a loose stool and a fan that needed fixing. But the letter stayed on the refrigerator, and every morning, when Beverley opened the door for the milk, she saw Angie's handwriting, and she read the last line without meaning to, the way you eventually read something you have seen enough times that it has become part of your body's ordinary motion through the day. "Thank you for not letting me see you give up, even when you wanted to." Some people will say a letter on a refrigerator doesn't change the math, that a woman should not have to line dry her laundry for 6 months because she spent her savings on a radiator and a box of second-hand dishes and a daughter's first semester. That a child should not have to grow up reading the silence of an empty fridge on a Thursday or learning to want smaller things before anyone asked her to. All of that is true. But there is also this. A daughter watched her mother do the hard thing, quietly, for 23 years. And when the moment came to say something, she did not say it the easy way. She went away and wrote it, and threw it out, and wrote it again until she had the right words. And then she gave them to the only person they belonged to. If this story reminded you of someone who kept going when they didn't have to, who showed up in the dark when no one was watching, share it with them. Some people never hear it said out loud. Subscribe for Masu Stories every week.